Happy Valentine's Day, YouTube! I am alone, so in lieu of any plans, I'm going to tell you my favorite romantic story. That is my sweet Valentine to you, a little edutainment. I make champagne in cans now. I don't know who this is for. So this is a relatively unknown sequence of events from European history, despite the fact that it has all of the makings of like a classic fairy tale or a big budget Hollywood period film that would have like a really extensive Oscars campaign. It's got a princess trapped in a castle. It's got a dashing Swedish count. It's got two different evil queen archetypes, and it's got like a probable murder. So when I said classic fairy tale, I meant like in the Grimm's tradition. This, my little cupids and nymphs, is the story of Sophia Dorothea of Celle. As is the case in many romantic tragedies, Sophia's story really begins years before her birth. George William of Luneburg was next in line to become the Duke of Hanover. G. Wills was not super interested in the idea of ruling, and he was especially not interested in his arranged marriage to his cousin, Princess Sophia of the Palatinate. Okay, insofar as I can tell, the only reason that this story hasn't had a number of adaptations at this point is because there are a lot of name repeats. So there's going to be a lot of Georges and a lot of Sophies and a handful of Eleanors. Just bear with me. I will use visual aids. I will use nicknames. You're just going to have to... you know what? If we made it through Game of Thrones, we can make it through a few Sophies, okay? Where G. Wills was kind of a chill dude who just kind of wanted to kick around Europe, drinking and partying for a few decades, Princess Sophia of the Palatinate was serious, intellectual, and politically motivated. In a word, she intimidated the shit out of him. G. Wills offered to cede his inheritance to his younger brother, Ernst August, if Ernst would take the bride along with it. Ernst agreed to the deal, but only if G. Wills would sign a document swearing never to marry and never to sire any rival heirs. George William, Bachelor of Luneburg, happily signed away his right to marry, as well as his throne, accepting as his only consolation prize the tiny duchy of Celle. G. Wills spent the next 7 years touring European brothels and getting drunk at Venice's Carnival. And then, as luck would have it, he met and fell in love with a Huguenot refugee named Eleanor d'Aubreuse. Eleanor was a penniless ex-noble, and oh boy, did Sophia of the Palatinate, now the Duchess of Hanover, hate her guts, referring to her only as the little clot of dirt. Classism, baby. Tale as old as time. In order to kinda sorta keep his promise to his brother, G. Wills and Eleanor entered into a morganatic marriage, which was a marriage that was recognized by the church but did not bestow any legitimacy or inheritance rights on any children they may have. And the child that they had was our heroine, Sophia Dorothea, born on September 15th, 1666. Sophia grew into a beautiful, outgoing, and shamelessly spoiled little girl. By all accounts, she was a talented singer, dancer, and harpsichord player, as well as embroiderer. She had her mother's thick, dark hair and fresh complexion, and she was known for her sparkling wit, and was often described as spirited, which I think means prone to the odd temper tantrum. Her parents doted upon their only child, out of love and admiration to be sure, but it's probably fair to assume there was a reasonable amount of guilt that they felt on account of the whole inheritance thing. And soon enough, Eleanor started begging her husband to maybe try to renegotiate that a little bit. You know, not leave their only child with absolutely no future because it's Lower Saxony in the 1660s and it's not like she's gonna go get a job. Luckily, by this point, our old friends, Duke Ernst August and Duchess Sophia, have had a handful of boys, so they let G. Wills and Eleanor officially marry and legitimize their daughter, instantly making her one of the wealthiest and most eligible heiresses in Europe. G. Wills and Eleanor shopped their daughter around to suitors throughout the continent. There was even talk at some point about marrying her to the Prince of Denmark, but that may have been aiming just a little high for a minor German noblewoman, even one with Sophia Dorothea's substantial dowry. Eventually, it was decided that Sophia would marry the handsome son of the Duke of Wolfenbüttel, a nearby rival of the Duke of Hanover. Ernst August and Duchess Sophia weren't going to have any of that nonsense. The day the engagement was to be announced, the Duchess raced to Celle and made G. Wills and Eleanor another proposition: marry Sophia Dorothea to their oldest son. Wolfenbüttel was a modest duchy. The Duchess Sophia pointed out that if Sophia Dorothea married into the House of Hanover instead of the House of Wolfenbüttel, she would one day reign over the large domain of Hanover-Osnabrück-Celle. It also probably didn't hurt in George William's mind that a marriage between his and his brother's children would ease over any residual tension from the whole break-in-the-non-marriage pact thing. To say nothing of the fact that Duchess Sophia was also cousins with Queen Anne of England, and the English succession was going through some stuff in the 17th century. The engagement to Wolfenbüttel was cancelled, and Sophia Dorothea was informed that she would be marrying her cousin, George Louis. Sophia Dorothea was not happy about this development. Allegedly, she threw a miniature of George Louis at the wall and screamed, "I will not marry the pig nose!" People called him Pig Nose or Pig Snout on account of the fact that he had a pig nose. Looks aside, George Louis of Hanover was not a popular guy. Even his own mother didn't like him, possibly because he was hopelessly dim-witted. He also didn't have very much in the way of a personality. As a boy, his parents sent him to live at the court of Louis XIV in Versailles, in the hopes that he might absorb some of that French raffinement. Sadly, to no avail. He was, however, an avid hunter and a fairly decent military leader, so he had that going for him. When the 16-year-old Sophia Dorothea was introduced to her future husband, she fainted. For his part, George Louis was equally disgusted by the match. They were married on November 21st, 1682, and Sophia Dorothea moved into the Leine Palace in Hanover with her husband and in-laws, taking only her maid of honor, Eleanor de Niesbeck, with her. Sophia Dorothea's first year in Hanover was rough. Her husband and mother-in-law both treated her coldly and cruelly. Duchess Sophia is sort of like the wicked stepmother of this story, but like an Angelica Houston wicked stepmother, like calculating and endlessly emotionally abusing our heroine, but like also a little sympathetic. And George Louis is, he's like just like a big, ugly high school bully. He's Biff Tannen. He's George Louis Biff. Sophia Dorothea responded to this cruelty by cracking jokes at her husband's expense in front of courtiers. Sophia Dorothea and George Louis argued frequently, but then in 1683 Sophia Dorothea gave birth to a son, who she also named George, and the couple came to a sort of a truce. Sophia Dorothea was widely beloved by most of the courtiers in Hanover, especially by her father and brothers-in-law, and eventually even George Louis really started to soften toward her. In 1686, Sophia Dorothea had a daughter that she named after herself. It's another Sophia Dorothea, but I think this is the last George and the last Sophia, I'm pretty sure. While maybe not what she dreamed of, life at court in Hanover for Sophia Dorothea seemed like it actually might be okay. It's fine. It's fine. This is fine. It's fine. It's fine. Then her father-in-law, Duke Ernst August, got a new mistress, the Countess Clara Elizabeth Platten. And Countess Platten is not here to make friends, she's here to win. Countess Platten secured a position as Duchess Sophia's lady-in-waiting and immediately set to work trying to fuck some shit up. She installed herself as Ernst August's mistress, and Duchess Sophia, the philosophical and serious Sophia of the Palatinate, who the charming G. Wills had so callously passed off to his younger brother so many years ago, only to be passed off again for this new mistress. That Duchess Sophia was just like, whatever, leaving Countess Platen to basically have free reign over Duke Ernst August. Platen ensured that the Duke bestowed titles and jobs upon her husband and friends, and she effectively turned her home into an illicit gambling den and brothel each evening, inviting all of Hanover's male courtiers to come hang. Now, Hanover was just the last in a long list of courts that Countess Platen had pulled this shit in. So after a youth of partying hard, at the ripe old age of 34, Countess Platen was kind of starting to look like she could maybe do with a juice cleanse and a sheet mask. She did what she could to try to maintain the status quo, her position as prettiest lady in court. She would apply thick layers of makeup. She'd be glittering in gemstones anytime she left the house. And she even took regular milk baths and then doled out the used milk to the poor as charity. Iconic. You'll love to see it. Nonetheless, Platen struggled to maintain her position as prettiest lady at court, and just like the evil queen cast her evil eye upon the maiden Snow White, our Countess Platen was not happy with the fresh-faced teenaged Sophia Dorothea who was sucking up all of the good attention. So, she cozied up to George Louis and was like, "Babes, you should totally get a mistress. It's so great. It's so good. I'll hook you up with one." And hook him up with one she did. A pretty blonde named Melusina von Schulenburg. Melusina was a sweet, simple girl who really didn't deserve to get wrapped up in all of this. And for her part, it seems as if she genuinely loved George Louis. Melusina was very thin and taller than George Louis, so when Sophia Dorothea failed to convince her parents and in-laws to tell George Louis to end the affair, Sophia resorted to calling Melusina the beanpole and mocking the couple. George Louis responded with violence, because, again, it's the 17th century, spousal abuse isn't like a crime. And at this point, miserable and furious and alone, Sophia Dorothea meets the Swedish Count Philip von Königsmarck, the great love of her life. The Königsmarck siblings, Karl, Philip, Aurora, and Amalia, were, aside from being Swedish nobility, pretty well known in Europe for being adventurers. They toured the continent, being lovable little scamps, doing such shocking things as acting in plays whilst also being women, or hiring hitmen to kill their girlfriends' husbands. Okay, admittedly, the bar for what was considered shocking was much lower for the daughters Königsmarck than for their male siblings. Anyway, at some point, Aurora and Philip were like, might fuck around and see what's going on in Hanover. And so they did. Philip von Königsmarck was sort of the ideal man of the 17th century. He was very sophisticated, elegantly dressed, usually sporting the longest, most luxurious wig, and well-versed in literature and the arts. But he was also all about hunting and warring and fucking. He took work as a mercenary soldier, and seemingly had a pretty good military mind. He was an excellent dancer, and in the HBO limited series of this, his character would probably be introduced to us laughing and surrounded by a bunch of topless women in a brothel. When Sophia Dorothea met Philip, she was taken aback by this hot Swedish hunk suddenly in her presence. Philip had already come prepared with his winning line. "Don't you remember me?" he asked, reminding her that when they were just children, his father had brought him to her father's court at Celle. They played together in the snow and traced the words, "Forget-me-not," on the palace windows. Swoon. Philip was soon appointed Colonel of the Guard in Hanover, and made his new home near the beautiful and enchanting hereditary Princess Sophia Dorothea. He spent many evenings with her and her brothers-in-law, who thankfully did not share George Louis's sullen, dull personality, discussing literature and music and art. For a long time, the friendship between Sophia Dorothea and Philip von Königsmarck blossomed, but never progressed to anything more untoward than mild flirtation. Countess Platen, uninhibited by any sense of propriety and fueled by jealousy and not an insignificant level of curiosity about the young count who had so charmed the princess she hated, invited Philip to visit her in private at her home. And soon enough, the Countess Platen was also having an affair with Philip, who himself was day after day falling more and more in love with the unattainable Princess Sophia Dorothea. After 2 years in Hanover, lovelorn and despondent, Philip volunteered for a military expedition in Greece in order to forget the princess. He returned from the bloodshed, if anything, more in love with her, and ended his relationship with the Countess Platen, who seethed at the young lovers. It is generally accepted that at some point soon after his return from the Peloponnesian expedition, the relationship between Philip and Sophia was consummated. Spies for the Countess Platen and George Louis were assumed to be everywhere in court, so the lovers met in secret and exchanged secret letters written in code. But Sophia Dorothea and Philip were no Zodiac killer. The code was pretty easily decipherable. Numbers or code names referred to places and people. Cella was 305, Sophia Dorothea was 201, Philip was 120, Countess Platen was the fat one, and Eleanor de Niesbach was le confidente. De Niesbach and Philip's sister Aurora helped the lovers pass letters and assisted in secret meetings, often in the Line Palace gardens. Every evening, Niesbach and I will walk together under the trees near the house, Sophia once wrote. You know the usual signal. You must make yourself known by it. The signal was to whistle or sing a tune called the Spanish Follies. The couple and their confidants would also sometimes signal to one another in court using a pair of embroidered gloves, or hide letters to one another in coat pockets and the brims of hats. So Sophia and Philip were very passionate. And out of the two, I think Sophia Dorothea was a little bit more in control of herself. But Philip felt all the feelings. And that really came across in his writing. What I wouldn't give to hear midnight strike! Be sure to have smelling salts ready, lest my excess of joy cause me to faint. I shall embrace your knees. My tears will be allowed to run down your incomparable cheeks. My arms will have the satisfaction of embracing the most beautiful body in the world. Oh, that I could live those moments over again. Would that I had died then, drinking deep of your sweetness, your exquisite tenderness. What transports of passion were ours! He uses a lot of exclamation points. Oh, and there's my favorite. If I could kiss that little place which has given me so much pleasure. Well, Philip, I have very good news. Philip and Sophia thought they were very, very good at being secret lovers, and tee-hee-hee, nobody knew they were having an affair. But of course, they weren't, and everyone did. In 1692, the Holy Roman Emperor bestowed upon Duke Ernst August the title of Elector of Hanover. This didn't really mean that Ernst's job or property changed in any perceptible way, but it was kind of like a public way of the Holy Roman Emperor bestowing brownie points. Aware of the rise in his public image, the new Elector of Hanover, Ernst August, decided it was time to shut down his daughter-in-law's affair in order to avoid a scandal. He asked Aurora, for her part in assisting the affair, to please get out of his kingdom and go home. And he sent Philip, who was still a soldier working under his command, to go fight with the Hanoverian army against Louis XIV. Sending letters to and from the battlefield, especially without alerting Ernst August or his spies, proved to be pretty difficult. Many of the letters were lost or destroyed, and each feared for their lover. Sophia Dorothea sunk into a deep depression, growing pale and thin. Philip became suicidal and adopted a bear. Like a literal bear. He adopted a bear. He wrote to Sophia, "I have a consolation here close to me. Not a pretty girl, but a bear which I feed.
If you should fail me, I will bare my chest and let him tear my heart out.
These tragic romances are seldom healthy, I'll admit.
Königsmarck was repeatedly denied leave to return and visit Hanover until he just up and deserted post, riding 6 days straight to see his princess. He was then allowed to stay in Hanover for a short period of leave, but Field Marshal Heinrich von Pottewils warned Philip that Ernst August and Countess Platen had employed spies especially to watch him. Before long, Ernst August politely informed Philip that he was banished from Hanover. Philip retreated to Dresden, where at an officers' mess party one evening, he got drunk and regaled the officers with stories of Hanover. He mocked the Countess Platen, her fat, ugly daughter Sophia Charlotte, and the ineffectual Ernst August, insinuated that Platen's parties often devolved into drunken orgies, and over howls of laughter he described the dull, ugly Prince George Louis and his beanpole mistress, Melusina. Tragically, someone in the crowd that night was a spy for Countess Platen. Word got back to her, and she immediately informed Melusina that her lover's wife's lover was spreading humiliating stories about her. Countess Platen, if it hadn't already been made clear, was a messy bitch. Sweet, simple Melusina was mortified and ran to George Louis in tears. George Louis, furious, ran to Sophia Dorothea's chambers and threw himself upon her, tearing out her hair and attempting to strangle her. She was only saved by some of her servants who heard her screams. It was after this vicious attack that Sophia Dorothea and Philip began planning their escape. Sophia knew that if she managed to escape Hanover, George Louis would divorce her for desertion, and then she would be free to marry Königsmarck. The only issue was money. Everything Sophia had legally belonged to George Louis, and Philip had spent his entire inheritance trying to maintain his life in Hanover. The lovers devised a plan to abscond to the Duchy of Wolfenbüttel. The Duke of Wolfenbüttel, who had been Sophia's fiancé so many years earlier, was sympathetic to the young princess, and furthermore an enemy of the Elector of Hanover. He could provide them protection and a means of escape. In June of 1694, Philip once again deserted his post. He disguised himself as a servant and snuck back into the city of Hanover. On July 1st, Sophia Dorothea sent Philip a note asking him to visit her in her apartments. This note was intercepted by one of Countess Platen's spies. Together in the princess's apartments, Sophia and Philip finalized their plans to escape the following evening.
Okay, now's the time in the video where I have to say most of the research comes from Sex with the Queen, the sequel to Sex with Kings, both by Eleanor Herman. Both are very entertainingly written history books about various European monarchs and their lovers, with an emphasis on entertainingly written. So it's at this point in the historical record that Philip just disappears. He's never seen or heard from again. This is what's in Sex with the Queen. In the depths of the night, Königsmarck bid his royal mistress farewell and went down the corridor humming a tune. He found that the door through which he had come had been bolted. The door which he had purposely left unbolted. Someone had locked it. But who? He stopped humming. Now he would have to go through the great hall to exit. Wary of a trap, he drew his sword. As he passed the huge fireplace, the soldiers leapt out, one of them hitting him on the head with the flat of his sword. After wounding 2 soldiers, the Count's sword snapped. Defenseless now, he was run through the body by saber thrusts and gashed in the head by a battle axe. As he bled on the floor, his last words were, "Spare the princess. Save the innocent princess." Upon hearing this, Countess Platen, with the pointed brocade toe of her diamond-buckled shoe, kicked the dying man hard in the mouth. In her jealous fury, she had plotted his death. But now, seeing him lying there, his scarlet blood staining the floorboards, she was sorry. Certainly she was afraid. First she called for a cordial, which she tried to force down his throat, then for bandages to staunch the grievous wounds. Vanquished, she realized her lover was dead, and that she had killed him as surely as if she had run him through herself. So that's clearly very speculative. That is highly dramatized. It is likely that Philip von Königsmarck was murdered, but most likely at the behest of Ernst August, because he had plans to escape with Ernst August's daughter-in-law to his enemies, and not, by Countess Platen because she was like a woman scorned or whatever. But it's still a nice, juicy little scene for the eventual miniseries, right?
The following day, Sophia waited for her lover, her rescuer. By noon, she still had not had word, and her maid of honor Niesbeck said that she'd heard rumors that he'd not returned home the night before. When Sophia attempted to leave her apartments, she was barred. The Elector's agents searched Königsmarck's rooms and found hundreds of Sophia's love letters. The letters were shown to Sophia's mother and father, Eleanor Delbruze and George William. Eleanor begged George William to have pity on their only child, but he washed his hands of her and swore never to speak of his daughter again. After Sophia had been imprisoned for 2 weeks in her own apartments without a word, the Countess Platen was finally sent to interrogate the princess. "The Elector has been aware of your relationship with Count von Königsmarck," said Platen. "Where is Königsmarck?" asked Sophia. "Has he been locked up too?" "I regret to announce, Your Highness, that Count von Königsmarck died 2 weeks ago." Sophia Dorothea fainted. When she came to, she sobbed, "Murderers! They have murdered him, a family of murderers." Sophia Dorothea's maid of honor, Eleanor de Niesbeck, for her part in the affair, was made a scapegoat by the royal family and imprisoned in solitary confinement in a fortress at Schwarzfels. Sophia herself was sent back to Celle, not to live with her parents, but to spend the rest of her life imprisoned in the castle of Alden. She was 28. Philip von Königsmarck's disappearance did not go unnoticed. Throughout Europe, there were whispers of a possible murder plot. A number of European embassies started putting pressure on Elector Ernst August to investigate the popular count's disappearance. Philip's sister, Aurora, really became a champion of the search effort. When she came back to Hanover, only to be turned away by Ernst August once again, she went to Dresden, where the Elector Augustus of Saxony was so taken by her that he made her his mistress, and he wrote to Ernst August personally, pointing out that Philip had been a personal friend of his, and that the last place Philip had been seen was Ernst's palace. Augustus of Saxony pressed so hard for info about Philip that Ernst August asked the Holy Roman Emperor to intercede and get Saxony to stop asking questions. After several years, inquiries into the disappearance of the Count dwindled, until no one bothered to ask anymore what had become of the handsome nobleman who had loved the captive princess. For the first year of Sophia's imprisonment, she was not permitted visitors, nor was she even permitted to go outside. Eventually, she was granted walks and visits from her mother, but she was never permitted to see her children, who for their part were just as desperate to see the mother they had lost so young. As a teenager, her son, George, abandoned a hunting party and rode to the castle of Alden, attempting to see his mother. He was refused entrance and punished. Eventually, Sophia also began a secret correspondence with her adult daughter. The younger Sophia Dorothea could not rescue her mother, but she employed Eleanor de Niesbeck as lady-in-waiting after Niesbeck managed to escape prison. A friend of Niesbeck, disguised as a roofer, cut a hole in the ceiling of Niesbeck's cell, and the two slid 180 feet down the fortress walls to freedom. Countess Platen would only live another 6 years after her rival Sophia Dorothea's imprisonment. It is alleged that on her deathbed, Platen confessed to having played a role in the murder of Count Philip von Königsmarck. In 1714, Queen Anne of Great Britain died, leaving no heirs. Eager to pass the throne on to a Protestant monarch, Parliament passed over 57 Catholic claimants to the British crown before arriving on the German Protestant George Louis. George Louis of Hanover was crowned King George I of Great Britain.
That's right, motherfucker! Fucking plot twist! George Louis. Fucking George Pig Snout Louis is the grandfather to that guy from fucking Hamilton. Sophia Dorothea is a distant ancestor of Prince Harry and little baby Archie. I don't know if this is if this is as exciting to you as it is to me, or was to me the first time I read it. Holy shit, you guys!
George I was a deeply unpopular king. He never bothered to learn English and took little interest in Britain or its people that he was now expected to lead. He was also despised by his own son, the future George II, who never forgave his father for what he had done to his mother. Sophia Dorothea lived 32 years in captivity in Alden, before dying painfully of liver failure and gallbladder occlusion at the age of 60.
So, a lot of Eleanor Herman's research for this part of Sex with the Queen comes from a historian called W.H. Wilkins, who wrote a book called The Love of an Uncrowned Queen about Sophia Dorothea. It's caramel. And W.H. Wilkins is a 19th century historian, and 19th century historians like to embellish, especially if it kind of helps the story. So take this with a grain of salt, but according to W.H. Wilkins, very early on in his marriage to Sophia Dorothea, George Louis, George I, went to a fortune teller who told him that if ever he should cause the death of his wife in any way, he would surely die within a year.
And sure enough, George I of Britain passed away almost 7 months to the day of his wife's death. Perhaps George's sole mourner was Melusina von Schulenburg, who believed her dead lover lived on in the form of a little bird who came to her window regularly and ate from her hands. When George II was crowned, he recovered and destroyed the Hanoverian records detailing his mother's adultery, including hundreds of her letters. Some letters, however, in the possession of Philip's sister Aurora, survived, and another 64 resurfaced in 1754. These nearly 300 letters still survive today and are preserved in the University of Lund. Some decades after the Königsmarck affair, workmen repairing the floor in the Great Hall of the Line Palace allegedly found a skeleton wearing a ring bearing the Königsmarck coat of arms. And in 2016, another set of bones were found on the site. Archaeologists hoped that they might be the remains of Philip von Königsmarck, but tests showed that they were the remains of animals and human bones from at least 5 different skeletons. As it stands, the fate of Philip von Königsmarck still remains unknown. Sophia Dorothea was laid to rest in Stadtkirche St. Mary's Church, in Celle. You can still go visit her there to this day. The final resting place of the royal family of Celle is stunningly unremarkable. In a small whitewashed room in the arches under the church, several plain black lead coffins sit in a row, but only one, sort of low and out of the way, sitting in its own corner, is frequently adorned with fresh flowers. The tiny casket that holds all that was once Sophia Dorothea of Celle.
So that's it, guys. That's the most romantic story that I know. Kind of a bummer ending, but that's the way I like them. Sorry if you heard low hum through a lot of this video. The LAPD have been circling my apartment with a helicopter for the last 83 years. There's nothing that I can do about it. Let me know if you like this in the comments. I have been away for a while. I don't know if you've noticed. But I'm considering doing more historical videos, especially historical videos that are maybe about sex and love. So leave a comment and have a happy Valentine's Day. I'm gonna go finish my canned wine.